everybody. We are just about to start this discussion. I'm just admitting everybody to the discussion, given that we have quite some people joining. It takes some time, but welcome everybody to this discussion, which is part of the Austrian COVID Pop-Up Hub. That is an initiative organized by the Austrian Ministry for Climate Protection. We have been discussing various issues over the past 6 to 7 months as a place we've seen the hub to exchange views, to discuss topics related to COVID, but also to discuss the long-term topics that are really central for the years after COVID. Before I talk more about the project, I would like to ask Michael Wiesmüller from the Austrian Ministry for Climate Protection to give us a short insight why he started and created this project, and also what he's expecting from this discussion. Okay. Mr. Wiesmüller, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Leo. Welcome all to our afternoon session. Great to see you all in this call. Just a little notice that the English name of the ministry is very long as well, but the short version is climate action, not climate protection, but climate action. This is a minor, but I think quite interesting difference. Thanks again for coming up. I'm not the guy who is talking a lot in this session tonight. I'm with the ministry who was trying to enable this hub and give the finance the initiatives and give the framework. But I can say some few words for those who are new to this initiative. What has been our motivation? We started the hub pretty much a year ago during the first lockdown, when it was really quite dark. And nobody really knew what is happening right now. And the main motivation was that we had the feeling that what is happening on a global scale is on a multi-level perspective disruptive for society, for economies, for a lot of things. And we wanted to have a kind of framework where we could discuss topics, exchange learnings, exchange experiences, and without being pushy, giving a kind of perspective and orientation what the post-COVID world in the area of innovation and technology, which is my domain, could be. We had 4 streams, or I would say thematic clusters, which has delivered incredible content so far. The first is on digital health, which is definitely a very important issue right now. We had very interesting sessions on the topic of distancing in a, quite broad sense. It means also geopolitical distancing, it means physical distancing, a lot of things. Then we had a stream or a group who was caring about the concept of buffer, economic buffer. We have learned that one of the experience of the crisis has been that we got lost of our buffers. And the buffer is a very enormous, important economic concept. And last but not least, the cluster which Hannes Leo has prepared, which is about intervention of state, the role of state in the, I would say, in the innovation policies. Needless to say that we have seen incredible actions of various member states or continents during this crisis. And the basic question is, what is the future, or what could be the future role of state interventions in a post-COVID area? Just wanted to close that and saying that as it often comes with talks or with discussions, they lead us over the months and weeks into unforeseen and unknown territories. And this is just the case here. In the discussions, we have come to quite fundamental economical questions of new paradigms of a post-COVID, and climate aware innovation and technology policy. Hannes Leo has prepared quite an interesting basic thesis paper, which will help us to find our way through the discussion. Thanks a lot for coming. I do hope that we have some very inspiring and interesting talks, and I hand over by this to Hannes Leo.
Thank you, Michael, for this introduction. I am pleased that we have such a high caliber panel here to discuss is it time to stop naive innovation policy? I will start with a brief introduction of panelists in alphabetical order. First, we have Sharon Vandenberg. He is a professor at the University of Barcelona. At the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology, he works on the interface of environmental economics, climate science, and innovation studies, has authored numerous highly cited papers, is already a honorary professor. How old are you to be already a honorary professor? But he will really help us to understand the bigger picture in this issue. Also, Miriam Hufnagl from the Fraunhofer Institut in Karlsruhe, ISI, will join the discussion. She is a researcher analyzing and evaluating national and European research and science policies and also governance issues related to that. But she also works at the German National Research Center, DESI, which is an electron synchrotron. I hope that is correct translated or correctly translated. And she works there on technology transfer issues. Last but not least, Katy Shields is part of the panel. She's a sustainability researcher, city councillor, and community activist. She worked for the Economist Intelligence Unit here in Vienna and also was research director of the CMIA business group. Now runs her own consulting firm, Numeralysis. I hope this is correct, but please correct me later on.
Sure.
Yeah, but I'm pleased that you're all here. Let's turn to the topic. Yeah, we know, or we have observed in the past 2 or 3 decades that Europe is really interested in pushing R&D, increasing R&D spending, also becoming the most innovative region globally. We have done this to become more competitive, but also to increase economic growth. We know from climate studies and other environmental issues that were analyzed that economic growth has a lot of side effects, greenhouse gases being one, increasing inequality another one. This is something we have discussed in another paper. But basically we have a conflict here that if we push innovation, we might have a trade-off with climate policies. We might obstruct achieving the goals of the Green Deal, which aim for a large reduction in greenhouse gases. And so we might really consider whether technology is helping us to achieve climate targets or obstructing achieving them. This said, we know that part of the solution to solve the climate challenge will be based on new technologies. Renewable energies is one of the success stories we had over the past years, but also electric cars are another one. Yeah. So let's jump into the discussion. The first round is the big picture. Then in the next round, we turn on the role of economists in that game. And in the third round, we discuss what kind of attempts are to be found in innovation policies, politics, to come up with solutions. And last but not least, we take this all together, the insights we generated in the discussion, to find common ground and see whether that is something that would help us to go forward and to come up with strategies after COVID that are more than simply back to normal. Jeroen, the floor is yours. Please give us the big picture.
Thank you very much, also for inviting me. Yes, well, you asked me to sketch a broad picture. That's not so easy because there are many opinions about the relationship between growth, environment, climate, and innovation. And this debate is complicated by the economic crisis in which we live, which some see as the cause of, or as the consequence of too much growth in the past, and others see as a reason to recover growth. So everybody has a reason to promote their perspective. And the debate on growth in relation to environment and technology tends to be a bit polarized, where you have people who are very much optimistic, believing that technology will help us to save the environment and growth. These people aim for and believe strongly in green growth. And this is a widely supported idea in politics, in society. But the interesting thing is that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And if you see the behavior of voters and of politicians, it doesn't look like they really believe in green growth. Because if they would, they wouldn't be scared to implement very strong environmental and climate policies. But they are scared. And that to me signals to some extent that, well, they have their doubts about green growth. Then you have, of course, people who are very critical of growth and technology and say, well, every good technology has a bad side. Technological innovation has a cost on the production side. The life cycle of new technologies is quite complex. You cannot be sure what's happening there. And if you don't have the good environmental and climate policies, you will not cover that. And that issue is more important and more complicated, I think, than many people realize. For instance, we talk easily about clean technologies, but these technologies are being produced by complex production systems that are not particularly clean. Most of the renewable energy that we produce is still based on fossil fuel run technologies, not only in China, where it's bad, but even in the US and Germany, to take three countries that are very important for production of renewables. In order to make sure that you choose the right renewable technologies, you should have environmental policies and climate policies in place that make sure that in each phase of the production of these technologies, you make the best choices. And that's not happening currently. And as a result, many people are buying the technologies from the cheapest supplier, which often is also the dirtiest supplier. The solar PV panels come predominantly from China now, and they're produced with a lot of CO2 emissions. So if we are precise, we don't call them clean technologies. Also in the user phase, technologies have problems, and this is related very much to the phenomenon of rebound. So you can say people buy cleaner technologies, low emitting technologies, but what happens is that often people also change their behavior. So you buy your electric car, and then suddenly you don't feel guilty to use that car so much. And if it's even subsidized, which it is in many countries, then there may be an incentive to use it more intensively. And so we have to be careful. Rebound is a phenomenon that is a really serious problem, still underestimated, I feel. The macro level rebound was recently in a review study suggested to be between 50 and more than 100%. For many technological innovations and energy efficiency improvements. So it means that we are reducing emissions with only half or much less than what we think we are doing. There's more complications. If you really want to go through a low carbon transition, then you have to invest a lot in technologies, that's for sure. But if you do that at a large scale, then you will move investments away from traditional innovations. That's inevitable. Money can only be spent in one way. And traditionally, innovation has helped to increase labor productivity. But if we focus on low carbon innovations, that will not also improve labor productivity in general. And so what we will lose is increases in labor productivity. And that is ultimately the basis of economic growth, of modern economic growth. So you could say that by shifting to low carbon innovations during a transition, you might reduce economic growth. That doesn't mean that we need to do that. So that's not what some people would call an anti-growth scenario. It is just a consequence, an inevitable consequence. And my personal belief is also that during a transition, to low carbon economy, we should be prepared for lower growth. Maybe in the long run, we can have higher growth. Personally, I don't care much for growth because I don't think GDP, the basis of economic growth, is a good indicator to measure progress in society. In most societies, it's not sufficiently correlated nowadays. I hear voices in the background. Don't know if everybody has the microphone off. Sorry. And in relation to innovation, the link between innovation and growth and environment, I also want to say that we should not aim only for innovation policy. I think Hannes Leo speaks about naive innovation policies, but I think we should also be careful to think that innovation can only come about through innovation policies. I would also here make an argument that correcting prices is so important. Why? Because a lot of innovations are triggered by changes in markets, in final demand, in intermediate demand. So if you change prices, carbon prices, and those affect choices in demand sides of markets, then ultimately that will also steer away innovation from high carbon. And of course, more directly, a lot of innovation decisions by firms are also triggered by costs and expectations about costs of inputs, including materials, energy, and all the substitutes that are available. So carbon prices might also change those choices. Recently, there was a review study that argued that prices don't have so much impact on low carbon innovation. I don't buy that. I was quite critical of that review study. I looked at the evidence myself, and I find quite a lot of evidence that prices, in fact, have had a lot of impact on low carbon innovation. And more importantly, the strong evidence in that direction comes from older literature about energy innovation, because we have seen, of course, in the history of innovation, much more variation in energy prices, and we could check how that has affected investments and successes in energy innovation, and that literature shows that there is a strong effect. And of course, carbon prices will work through energy prices. So anything you find for energy prices is directly relevant also for carbon prices. So let me say finally that I'm not an optimist or a pessimist if it comes to the relationship between growth, environment, climate, and innovation. But I think we should be very scientific in that and make use of good indicators and good information. And that's why I promote my perspective of growth. Be critical of growth, but don't be against growth. Don't think that GDP changes are so important. Let's try to move away a little bit from the GDP growth test of society. Let's just judge policies on the problems that they can solve, and try to focus on important problems. And then we can see what are the effects on growth. And we shouldn't be too afraid if growth will temporarily be lower or close to zero. In fact, I think that the long-term perspective that we should have is that growth will come to an end at some point, because growth ultimately depends on how much labor productivity we can improve, and that works through two channels: education and technological innovation. And in many countries, we have exhausted all the opportunities for education, and there's also arguments that the most important innovations are behind us, not before us. If it comes to let's say growth enhancing innovations, not if it comes maybe to environmental innovations. So let me leave it at this, and then I think there's enough food for thought and further discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You raised a lot of issues, some of which I don't want to go into, like are we close to the end of growth, or is the big growth thing ahead of us? I mean, that would be a separate discussion, which I think is also very important to raise. But if I get it right, you are kind of growth agnostic, yeah? It might happen, it might not be happen, but it should not be at the center of our considerations. And if you talk about the rebound effect, then I guess you also indicated this whole climate issue. There are relationships between innovation and how you produce electricity. If everything is 100% renewable, then you wouldn't be really concerned about the rebound effect. Is that so?
Good point. Yeah.
If your whole energy system is already totally renewable or produced by renewable energy, then the rebound effect is not really a big deal, basically. Yeah. So I guess it's just an
technology and AI
what we are doing here.
Whole variety of the years. At H&M,
someone is talking in the background.
Yes, maybe you could mute your microphones. That would be helpful. So anyway, it points that we are not just talking about innovation policies, but a lot of other policy areas which we are now discussing in isolation, and where we have to start to make the bigger picture. Also encourage policymakers that things might change, and that change is not such a big problem. I was reading a paper of yours which you wrote in 2011, also about the big picture and innovation. And at that time, renewable energy technologies were really expensive, and you would have to give up growth to install them and produce energy that way. That has fundamentally changed, I think, in these past 10 years, in the sense that now electricity or wind, solar or wind is cheaper than all other fossil energies, and so it's easier to make this transformation.
I am not convinced of that still. I'm still not convinced. I think there's a lot of optimism because all the literature on EROI, energy return on investment, shows a more critical perspective that says that there is still too much optimism in comparing renewable energy technologies with fossil fuel technologies. And all the network effects and the irregularity and the storage. And so I'm not 100% convinced that we are already there. But I admit that between 2011 and now, a lot has improved. And so if I am optimistic, it is indeed because of the rate of innovation with regard to renewable energy especially. But I'm not so optimistic as some people. I am still skeptic because I still see that to bring it to a larger scale is going slow. And that's not only because people are not making the investments that are economically profitable. I think it's a little bit more complicated. And regarding the rebound, I would just go, we are still far from 100% renewables. And on the way to there, rebound will be important. So I think to make sure that you have the most effective outcome of your climate policies, you have to be concerned about rebound and make sure that your climate policy mix includes measures that control rebound as much as possible. And that's not so easy. And that's not on the frame of many people who have a lot of impact on climate policy, because rebound is a little corner of a complex debate. And I think it should occupy a more central position, really. Yeah.
The other thing I take, and that I think leads to the second topic, is the carbon tax that you're proposing. That seems to be needed to guide innovation in the right directions, just away from general purpose innovation that might increase competitiveness and increase economic growth to something that reduces the carbon footprint of the economy of society. And I think this leads to Katy, which is a bit reflecting on what economists had to say on this agenda, because my impression was that economists are rather schizophrenic in this respect, always happy if they can talk about economic growth, if economic forecasts, or if forecasts for economic growth are high, that's something to be happy. At the same time, the same economists can talk about climate change and be highly worried, but they don't seem to make that interlinkage between these two areas and start to discuss it from a broader perspective. Katy, what is your view on this issue?
Thank you, Hannes. Yeah, and thank you also for the invitation to be here and for the and being able to hear also from Jeroen. I find myself nodding in agreement at a lot of what you had to say. I should maybe just, before I start, sort of a little bit more background on where I'm coming from. As Hannes mentioned at the beginning, so I've got a background as I'm a recovering mainstream economist. I worked for about a decade, you know, one of the better known, let's say, neoliberal economic media groups, the Economist Group here in Vienna for a number of years, and my role was economic analysis and consulting for governments and for businesses, very much along the lines, along these kind of pro-growth lines. And I've spent the last several years moving in the direction of sustainability research and trying to kind of grapple, like as Hannah said, with this kind of contradiction between you know, the classic economic ideologies and how we can transition to the sustainable world that we very much want and need. Just to also leading into this, picking up on a couple of things that Jeroen had said, which really stuck with me. I spend most of my time writing, and it was via an article that I'd written on this topic that Hannah's got in touch with me. And I feel communication is a really important part of when we talk about you know, the issues of growth and innovation. And Jeroen, you mentioned kind of the behaviour of voters doesn't seem to imply that they may be in favour of this kind of post-growth or growth agnostic or degrowth economy, and I agree. When we look as well here in Austria or in my, you know, in the UK. But what I think where we see the contradiction is that the vast majority of voters want to see more ambitious climate policies. So I think we have to address also this communication problem that we have, and especially when we're talking about things like carbon prices. We can all remember the Gilets jaunes protests in Paris against, you know, these you know, diesel. And the impact that has obviously on the lower income. So when we're talking about prices or we're talking about behaviour, we've really got to also think about the societal impacts, and you know, the idea of achieving a just transition. And I think if we manage that, then maybe we will also have more acceptance around, you know, around the carbon tax. But I think that's definitely one of the issues that we have right now. I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes kind of talking about the article that I've written and you know, my view on this. As I said, I've tried to spend the last several years to understanding what has gone wrong with economics and why we haven't managed to fix the problems. So I'm going to take you through just a very brief history, and this is very much my view, but it's based on having spent about, as I said, a decade or so right in the neoliberal mindset. An education, you know, I'm a alumni of the kind of the 90s, very much international economics, very trade focused. So I wrote my degree around comparative advantage and all the benefits that was going to bring us, opening up our borders to free trade. And as I said, spent the last couple of years more on the kind of on the sustainability side and speaking with a lot of different people and experts. And you know, I spent quite a lot of time with the club, working with the Club of Rome, for example, and trying to understand you know, what this schizophrenia, where this schizophrenia in economics comes from. So if we think about what's happened over the past 50 years, and we were, you know, starting to see around about the 1970s when people started to see that there was a problem with our environment, that we had the post-war era, we had you know, rising incomes, rising consumption, but also, you know, a recognition that things were not okay in the environment. And that was when we really started to see, you know, like the Earth Day and the start of the environmental movement, and people you know, we had the US in particular, things like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act coming out of that kind of movement. And at the time, if you spoke to economists at the time, they were very much against. You know, we had that. It was also when the Club of Rome came out with its limits to growth report, and economists were extremely critical of that and of this idea that we should talk about ending growth or anything except growth, because, you know, we've still got so much to do. We've still got so many people to lift out of poverty. So that was kind of the 70s and the narrative going on then. Then we got into the 80s. The economy was going better, and we had the era of financial liberalization. And the mantra or the message coming from economists then was, well, you know, don't worry, you know, we're starting to clean up the environment because people are getting, you know, richer, and when people become better off, they become more aware, more environmentally aware, and that is where that's the goal. So what we need to do is we need to lift everyone out of poverty, trickle down economics, financial liberalization, and then we'll start to clean up the environment. So then we get into the 90s, the problems start to become more evident. Things like the ozone layer. We have the first conference in Rio, and again, you know, environmental movement starting to get stronger, but being sort of quashed by this idea that no, what we need to do is we need to have trade, global trade, and that is what is going to fix the environmental problems, right? Because we're going to bring all the developing countries out of poverty, and they're going to demand cleaner economies too, cleaner policies too, and that's going to fix the problem. And then so we get into the start of the 2000s, and we start to see things start to move in the right direction. This is when I started to work as an economist, and we were talking about climate, we were talking about carbon taxes already then. We had people like William Nordhaus talking about climate carbon taxes, but in this sort of framework of it being an externality, and we've got to kind of reach an optimal, right? An optimum between growth and, you know, cleaning up the environment, which is obviously important, but hey, we've got to have growth as well. And then, and of course, we also had the innovation going on between technology and financial liberalization. So people like Alan Greenspan saying it doesn't matter anymore, we're not going to have any more boom and bust, so it's fine. The economy can grow and we can clean up the environment. And of course, come 2007, 2008, that didn't play out. We had the crisis, and instead of this, you know, push coming to really tackle the environmental problems that were so evident then, we got, you know, austerity, we got quantitative easing, but none of the kind of directed policies that we really needed to fix the growing climate and ecological crisis. And now we're at a stage where we've just come out of the crisis. We were just, everyone now is aware, and economists as well, agreeing that we really need to do something. But we've got a pandemic. And are we seeing the ambition? Are we seeing finally this recognition that we need to change? And, you know, I agree, I'm not saying whether growth or degrowth or growth agnostic or to be growth agnostic, but surely it's now time to think, what do we actually want from our economy? What is the purpose? And for me, that is what is missing in this debate. Yes, we need innovation, but we really need to focus on where it is that we're going. So that's, yeah, I think I'll probably touched on enough there. I hope that was maybe somehow helpful to see the viewpoint. Yeah, I'll get to Hannes now.
Thank you, Katy. Do you have a view? I think in economic theory, more or less, the matter is obvious. Yeah, you have growth, you have externalities, you have to treat externalities in some way. We are compensating companies for positive externalities, but we are not really punishing them for negative externalities, at least not to that extent, particularly not in research and innovation. Yeah? You get a lot of innovation grants to create more innovation, to create more R&D, and whether they are positive externalities or not, but at least they get subsidies and support. Yeah? But policymakers seem to be very hesitant to come up with a carbon tax or something similar, or to increase the ones we have to more or less have an equal playing field. What is the reason? Why is this so difficult? It seems obvious for an economist, and even economists, when talking about the issue, forget most of the time that they have to have both. You know? Yeah. But do you have a view on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, I see carbon prices, and economists many agree it as one of the tools that we will need for sure. You know, seeing as I've now been on the political side as well, I think it comes down to influence over policy, and again, this, unless we tackle these issues around, as I touched on earlier, who is going to be impacted. Whenever we're talking about, carbon touches all of our lives. Our entire economy is run on fossil fuels, so quite often the debate is, it's framed, is it's car lobby, or is it, people, as in the Gilets jaunes, people that are driving vehicles. We also had, again in France, protests by farmers. I think it was in Lyon, where all they wanted to do in the schools was reduce the meat content of the lunches. And again, there were protests. I think the reason why there is so little appetite is, it's on both sides. It's on the society, on the impact it will have, and it's always on the, it's always on the lowest, the lowest, but the lower income, whether it's small businesses, whether it's farmers, whether it's, the gig economy drivers that can't afford a job anymore because of a carbon tax. I think, this is where you will fail to get the support. And then obviously you've got to look as well at, at the lobbying that is going on, and the very important car industry in Germany, for example, is clearly one of the, one of the players in this mix. Which is why I think that you cannot just be talking about carbon prices alone. It has to be a package of measures that is part of this just transition that we need.
Jeroen, you wanted to react on this?
Yes, I would like. Katy raises interesting points. I would like to say, though, that in favor of carbon pricing, more than 60 countries and regions have carbon pricing. So to say it's not a success, it's also not true. It's true that the prices are low, but that holds for all the climate policies. I mean, in that sense, I think sometimes or often people criticize carbon pricing for not being strong, or say that carbon pricing has negative impacts on low-income households. But that will hold for any serious climate policy. Yeah? Let's be clear about that. If a climate policy is going to be effective, it's gonna make life hard, and especially for people with low incomes. What is interesting about carbon pricing is that it generates revenues. So all proposals now and all practical applications use revenues in different ways for green projects, which is not such a good idea, but people like it. And the best idea would be to use it for low incomes, to compensate people, and to reduce labor taxes, which is also good for labor markets and for employment. What is also positive, I think, that people don't realize is that
So I can't hear you right now.
Policies among countries.
Jeroen, I think it's very difficult.
ETS was just the ETS, the European trading system, was just an experiment, and it worked. The experiment worked. Maybe it didn't reduce emissions so much, but it did. There's a lot of studies now that show that. But what is more important, it harmonized policies. And that is the key, in my view, to future success. If we want stronger climate policies in the future, it's only going to happen if countries do it simultaneously. Because each country is afraid for their competitive position, and rightly so. As an economist, I can also not deny that that's a fear they should not have. No, if you would price your carbon at 100 and other countries only at 50, then you lose a lot of competitiveness. That's for sure, because a lot of competitive international trade is highly energy and therefore carbon intensive. And I would also like to say that people are not always critical of all the instruments in the right way. And I just had a paper published now in climate policy, where we talk about the policy mix, and we also compare instruments more systematically. And for instance, just one detail, people say often carbon taxes are inequitable. Well, not if you use the revenues, but look at adoption subsidies for electric vehicles or solar PV on rooftops. That usually goes to better off households, to richer people, because poor people don't even have a house, will not buy an electric car, often don't have a car. So and nobody complains about that, then it's perfect. Adoption subsidies can be inequitable. That's no problem. Well, let's be fair about the evaluation of all the different policy options, I think. And final comment about schizophrenia in economics. I would like to make an exception for environmental economics, because you spoke about the 70s, but the field in which I work, environmental economics, exists since the 1960s and has always been taken seriously in economics. And so it's true that maybe in economics as applied in reality, it looks like right-wing, growth-oriented. But if you look at the writings of many Nobel Prize winning economists, really a lot, they're all critical of growth and GDP often. It's interesting, eh? I have a paper, The GDP Paradox, where I refer to a lot of Nobel Prize winners who have expressed themselves critically about growth and GDP. So, and not just in the last decade, many decades ago. So I would also like to say that in economics, there's also a very critical attitude, and there's a whole field of environmental economics, and so economics is not homogeneous, but what happens is that maybe in policy making or in newspapers, some opinions dominate, and that's a pity too. But environmental economics is very strong, is now also undertaken by a lot of mainstream economists, and so I would like to say that the schizophrenia is not so strong as it looks like, in my view.
Actually, I think that was my point. Schizophrenia, that was my point. I think from more or less observing, I'm of course aware that there is a big strand of environmental economics, and they have always stressed the issues that we need now in this situation since the 70s, and even before that, But in real world politics, even if it comes to policy advice, many of the mainstream policy advisors are very reluctant to advocate carbon taxes and get rid of economic growth. It's always economic growth that seems to win. That at least is my observation and my understanding in most of the cases. I know that you have a different observation on that.
No, economic growth is deeply entrenched in our society, but I think it's beyond economics. I think in economics you find more critical voices almost nowadays than in many other areas. So, but I also don't think that the solution is to be very much anti-growth. I think that just creates polarization and no solutions. And also, if you send the message to society, we need to degrow to solve the climate crisis, that will not raise political support and societal support for the tough policies we need, in my view. But that's an opinion and I understand also why there are other opinions there.
Katy.
I just wanted to come back in there. I mean, I studied environmental economics myself as part of my transition away from the mainstream, and I'm well aware that these voices are there. I think the main problem is that, I don't know any other field of science where they allow themselves to be pigeonholed in this way. I mean, I've written, also not so recently, but also for The Economist, and just by looking through it, you have the global economy section, and then you have your politics, and then somewhere at the back you have something on climate change, and the economy is written about as if it's completely separate from the environment and ecology. And I was, the article that I wrote recently was a response to, I'm sure you've read Partha Dasgupta's report on the economics of biodiversity, where again, I just felt like it was, we're pigeonholing the economy again. Taxes, carbon taxes, and all of these instruments are important, but I still don't get the sense that economists are really thinking about this, the economy as this complex system of the feedback loops. Even if we talk about carbon pricing, I don't see it as being there. We all agree that probably growth needs to come to an end at some point, but we often talk about, should we get there by design or by disaster? And what I find frustrating with economists, even those that are quite critical, is that they don't seem to be sort of trying to chart that trajectory, which we know we kind of need to get to, even if we are agnostic. And I've been involved in various studies that even suggest that we'll probably see an uptick in growth before it starts to peter off, as we get this transition, if we really want to meet the Paris climate goals, which is obviously fine. And I'm very agnostic about that, but I would like to see this trajectory where we can actually get ourselves away from being fixated and really focus on, what we want our economy to achieve, which is, planetary and social well-being. Yeah.
But here we are in full agreement. I mean, and I think also the compartmentalization of economics as a discipline is a problem. And you see that also in other disciplines, but there it doesn't have so devastating effects, because in the end, in economics, the people who are focusing on growth all the time, they tend to have more power. In macroeconomics, environment and climate are a minor issue, and that's a pity. It's absolutely true. And if you look in the media, the two economists with more media attention are probably Paul Krugman and Joe Stiglitz. And Krugman is pro-growth totally. What he said about environment was a bit naive in my view. Stiglitz is better, but even he has some orthodoxy, although Stiglitz already wrote in the 70s about, or maybe the 60s, about environment. He was early, so he knows the debates. I don't know. I don't have a simple solution for that. The problem is just that not even Stiglitz will make a difference. If Stiglitz makes a good point, it also gets lost. If I make a good point, it doesn't even reach so many people. So yeah, it is frustrating. And The Economist has written a fairly good number of articles about the environment, I think also. Yeah, they're surrounded, as you say, by other articles that seem to be a little bit or very much inconsistent. Right. So you need almost an editor who watches consistency and says, sorry, none of these articles can be published unless they are mutually consistent, But that is not what is happening, of course. We are just overrun with a variety of opinions. And it's not easy. It's not easy. I agree.
I think this consistency argument is a good one, not just for publishing articles, but also for economic policy. And I would like to turn back to the innovation issue now. I think Schumpeter would be a good introduction to all the discussions we just had, because in the book where he described creative destruction, and the process of economic development, the second part of the book was devoted to the end of growth and how we should manage the economy at that time, how we could transition to a planned economy. We are still far from this, but at least he was raising the same issues. But we, it seems, have still some innovations ahead of us. And given how we started the topic, I would now ask Miriam to give us an insight how people or economists are dealing with the issues in innovation policies. What kind of solutions are they putting forward to deal with the climate crisis, to come up with policies that more or less use innovation to sort out climate issues and come up with a productive society nonetheless. Miriam.
Yes. Thank you, Hannes. And also thank you, Jeroen and Katy. This was already very, very inspiring.
I think we can't hear you right now. We have one of the usual technical glitches in such discussions. I hope Katy is coming back soon, or maybe can switch her connection. Doesn't seem so. Basically, we intended to look at the different strands in innovation policy, how they deal with that issue. One strand is, as we already said, that the more innovation you have, the better, and innovation will solve all kinds of problems without even intervening. That is more or less one strand, that seems to be highly important for policymakers and politicians. We see more resources devoted to tax incentives which don't discriminate between different topics. But we also have efforts in innovation policies that deal with mission orientations, where they really come up with complex processes to sort out the climate crisis and to develop plans how we could proceed, to make the connections also between different policy fields in order to have horizontal topics. Recently, this mission orientation, I think, was also used synonymously with making strategies, coming up with coordinated policies. Just from my personal experience, we have already suggested mission policies in the 90s. Miriam, are you back? Okay, no, this seems to be somebody else. We came up with mission-oriented policies in the 1990s because we thought that we actually should tackle these climate problems at the time already at that time. But I think, like others, these policies seem to be very complex to put into action. And it seems to be very difficult to have the different actors join in and work towards a common goal together in coordination. And so, yes, it was good on paper. In practical terms, it was rather difficult. But one of the questions, and that is again addressed to you, Jeroen and Katy, was, I mean, if we have this general not differentiating innovation policy interventions, that you aim at stimulating innovation in order to have more growth, is this still a helpful approach, or should we actually, as you mentioned earlier, shift more of the resources towards low carbon innovations? Because that's what we need if we want to be in line with the overall targets of the European Union, the Green Deal, and count on economic development rather than economic growth.
Well, if you see this as a war economy, we're fighting a war against climate, against climate change, then I think you should invest much more than what we're doing in innovation and strange techniques, and we could do much more. Also investing much more in infrastructure and making sure that also users are more stimulated to make the change to new technologies. I think we could do much more. That's evident to me. I'm not an expert on the details of technological innovation policies, but for instance, of course, you have to be careful that firms, that there's no windfall profits for firms, and firms are very good in getting these, but probably a little windfall profit is a cost associated with stimulating technologies a lot. So, but I don't have the feeling that we're doing enough in this respect, and I think we could do much more. And that innovation should also be brought among all the disciplines. It should not only be technical innovation, but also the social and economic side of it, and the design side and everything. But what we need for that is that climate change is recognized as a really dramatic issue which needs all our attention. 90% of our political system should now be focused on climate change. It's still not happening. I mean, slowly we're talking more about climate is a serious problem, but it's not shown by the behaviors. And for instance, I know in the Netherlands now there's a new government being formed and there's negotiations, and it doesn't look like climate is playing such a big role in the negotiations. So yeah, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. People can say they recognize climate change, but we need much more. But I also am positive and optimistic that in the next years a lot will change. For instance, in Spain, when I came here in 2007, nobody was speaking about climate change on the television. The weather people were never talking about it. And now, when you have the news about the weather, they talk about climate change. And yesterday, the person said people should become more conscious about climate change because it's really threatening for Spain. We're really at risk. We're in a zone. And that was unheard of to say 10 years ago. And that person reaches everybody in the country. So it's quite important. It's not a newspaper, it's the television. It's still quite effective, I think. So there are these little indications which make me optimistic, but innovation policies, many steps beyond that. First, there has to be more consciousness about the urgency of the problem.
Okay. Miriam, I think you are back, are you?
I am. I'm so very sorry.
No
I
problem.
could listen to all the fantastic aspects that's been put forward. And the minute I wanted to raise my voice, the router went down and really down. So sorry, I'm back again. Hopefully this will work. Well, as I just tried to explain, as a political scientist, I actually only got re-engaged with economics when I read Mariana Mazzucato and her writings on the entrepreneurial state and everything that came from that. So it might be familiar to all of you or to parts of you, but in this book, she really talks about the wealth and sort of the good engagement of the state pushing for research funding mainly, but also through research funding for innovative ideas and practices that at the end of the day, this is her case study, this is where her whole narration starts. At the end of the day, all these public money spent into research gave or enabled basically the iPhone to be made by Apple in a nutshell, really in a nutshell. However, she coined the frame of the new mission orientation. And I would like to draw to our attention to this aspect and try with my little introduction. I haven't really prepared anything, but I hope I can sort of organize my thoughts well around everything that has been said so far. So as I said, I would like to talk about the mission orientation and innovation policy and maybe wrap our heads around not so much the innovation part, not so much the deep tech, high tech, digital tech, whatever part of it, but around the sort of the mission part. What does it mean? What it really does mean, this concept in a nutshell, is that we are trying to foster systemic solutions, transforming socio-technical systems, as we would say in the academic world. But basically, we would like to try to set up missions that take, obviously, innovation and research, clever ideas, solutions, platforms, whatever, into mind, but be accompanied by the classic set of policy instruments, being regulation, being tax, being whatever, to really transform an entire system. This is sort of the basic idea of the new mission orientation. And if we talk about missions, let me take the German case study I'm working on with my colleagues from Fraunhofer. In Germany, in this very fourth generation of the high-tech strategy momentarily, they, like the cabinet, announced 12 missions, being as diverse as, fostering biodiversity or fighting cancer. I myself work on the issue of circularity, but it doesn't really matter what kind of mission we pick. Everything we realize when we look at those missions is they are cross-cutting issues, just like innovation is, but obviously saving the world from cancer or fighting cancer can only be done if you do have obviously enough money to foster the research, if you do talk to the industry that puts out the right treatment, but if you also involve the patients and hear what they say, have this whole issue of single medication for single people is the wrong word, but you know what I mean, and personalized medicine. So anyway, from an eagle-eye view, I think what we need to realize is holistic, systemic policies and sort of ideas. This is what we all need to aim for. And I saw in the chat before, how can we make people more aware of things was raised there as an issue. And this also, pays attention to this issue. Having said this, I'm involved, as I said, in sort of advising the German ministry on how to better roll out mission-oriented policies. And from what we've seen so far, we can actually say from those 12 missions, only 2 maybe even qualify as missions. The basic bottom line is most of the policies are actually really focused too narrowly. They overburden the expectation. You can't really fight climate change just by focusing on science and technology, obviously. You would need to, also empower all the aspects Jeroen and Katy also acknowledged so far, talking about carbon, taxation and whatever. But, and this may be also a question that I would later on raise or hand back to Michael. What we realize is that what we actually see is policy layering, that a lot of stuff, a lot of policies that actually should, serve to find answers for our current problems are still rooted in the beliefs of the 80s, the 70s, maybe even the 60s, which is not bad, but we need to modernize those paradigms. So with the new mission orientation, we first of all need to, and if I say we, I'm actually talking to policymakers, we would need to acknowledge, hey, we at, for example, the Ministry for Research and Education, we can't solve the world on ourselves. We need to talk to the Ministry for Economy, the Ministry for environmental change, but really on an open-minded and targeted, solution-oriented manner. And if we can't do this, this is at least what we can see in the UK also, but very much in Germany, we would then need to acknowledge, okay, if coordination and this whole governance frame that is always highly acclaimed, if this is not working, then we really need to separate the tasks. Everyone is responsible for each and her own task, but we need to do this properly and not hanging on to the past and saying, yeah, climate change, we know it's an issue, but the only thing we can do is foster universities or foster this or foster that. We need, as I said, systemic solutions and a consistent state. Really, we know the problem's there, but we need, there is all this multi-level governance and we need to empower the citizens and la-di-da. Yes, it's all true, but at the end of the day, we need commitment and leadership by, well, the owners. It sounds a bit strange the way I say it, but it's true. If there's no commitment, it's not happening. That's at least what we realize. And this means acknowledging, political power games. The problem obviously is the time horizons are enormously huge when we talk about climate change. And obviously the time horizons this is really something my 6-year-old might be able to refer to, but the time horizons that are important for ministries, for cabinets, for, are, 4 years, 5, maybe 2 legislative periods, but nothing like 20 years. But we need to really try to push from an academic, but also from a debate like this, a point of view, to get more directionality into politics. That's actually what I would like to ask for. And reflecting this role of the state is something we need to put forward and push forward through debates like today. So talking about, maybe just one step back, about mission orientation, and that would also be a question I would like to maybe ask the audience, but more the plenary. What my colleagues and I, what we lack so far are good, nice, decent, and really applicable indicators for how we can assess change. Obviously, scientific impact can be measured in a traditional way, patents, licenses, bibliometric indicators, you name it. But this often acclaimed socioeconomic benefit or impact, when it comes to, jobs, innovation, how much money is in this and that startup, how many startups are there, We also have numbers and indicators for that. But how can we really break down the sophisticated modeling, economically wise, that informs politicians to really make a mind shift and address the expected directionality that we as citizens, but also as academics, expect from them to do now? Because what I realized, if you can't measure it, you can at least tell the story. Yes, it's good. But talking to politicians, I think this, how do we measure? What's the benefit? What's the impact? How can we achieve it? Is still the main driving force for people in the ministries to take or to leave out on action, basically. So maybe as a quick starting point, since, I cut my time myself due to technical issues, but maybe we can keep talking about this, a sound and sense-making policy mix for, the transformative change we all aspire, and how to really measure it and, make it understandable, comprehensible.
Yes, thanks a lot for this input. Before we discuss it, I think I would like to ask Katy, as a city councillor, From this perspective, how do you address these issues? What is innovation important at that level? How is the awareness of people impacting on their willingness to do something against climate change, to invest in whatever? Yeah. Do you have observations on this?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I mean, obviously, at this, at the local community level, I mean, a city is probably an exaggeration. In the UK, we wouldn't call my town a city. We have 10,000 people, so we're very much at the community level. So, I mean, things like innovation, this is not kind of the vocabulary that we're using when we're trying to get action on climate change here. We're really trying to, we talked about it earlier, we don't need any innovation to make our communities more sustainable. We really just need to implement what we have there, and it's really basic. It's putting in a bicycle lane. It's getting people to change their heating system. It's encouraging people to put solar panels on their roof or to take their bicycle. And it may be around innovation in terms of communities. The social innovation side, I think, is something that you can really reach people on. So, for example, new forms of businesses like cooperatives, social enterprises, to help meet some of those service needs and community needs in a different way. Cooperative housing as well, so we can also think about how we can use our resources more efficiently. So I think, I don't really know if that's helpful, but yeah, I see innovation, I guess, I do see the need for innovation, at a national level, where I guess where we need maybe more innovation are things like around, energy, sort of, one of the biggest impacts that we have at the community level where I really see a disconnect is simply the development side. So at least, I mean, it depends very much by country, but Austria has the worst record in Europe, the worst rate of soil sealing. We cover more soil than any other country in Europe at a higher rate. And one of the reasons for that is that the decisions are taken at a very local level. It is astonishing how much power a local council has, and these are mostly people working part-time. They've got other jobs, they've got various backgrounds, they've probably never heard of something like mission orientation, or maybe even not carbon taxes. So these are people that are really different levels of awareness of these issues, and they're making decisions on, allowing, whether it's a company or a hotel or a supermarket, to cover, a piece of land with concrete. They may not even make it, they may not even have regulations on putting solar panels in, or putting trees in, or protecting the soil. So these are the sorts of issues that we have, and I guess we need kind of more innovation on, how can we reach very quickly these level of decision makers, but also I know that the EU has some programs around positive energy districts and kind of trying to create communities that are sustainable, or circular cities, circular communities, and I see a lot of that happening. But my God, when I try to bring that up for discussion in my council, it's this is complete new information. So we really need urgently, I think, to start raising the awareness of these solutions if we want to actually create the kind of living labs, or the conditions in as many places as possible, so we can really accelerate the changes that we need. Yeah.
Okay, this is more or less social innovation or something like this, or to get the awareness, as also Miriam said, for these issues, and then we can start working on this. I think we have covered a lot of ground now, but we should try, at least in the last 20 minutes we have for this discussion, to find some common ground out of these discussions we had. Yeah? Please help me with doing this. Maybe in the audience also you've seen common strands or things, building blocks we need to make a decision on which kind of innovation policies we keep to address climate change and how we deal with growth and whatsoever. Yeah? So one issue I took is this carbon tax, which seems, at least from my point, an important ingredient in all of these policies because it changes incentives. And I think it's something most economists could agree upon, that this is needed for giving a different direction to innovation and changing incentives for everybody when decisions are taking more climate friendly decisions. Is that something we can agree on, or do you have different views on this? There is no agreement. What is the solution? Yeah, that was a statement in the chat. That's right. Yeah, so maybe we work on the solutions. Yeah, not on where we disagree, but is there something we agree upon? Yeah.
Maybe if I just quickly may, well, as I said before, I'm not a particular expert on this kind of policy instrument, the tax issue. However, what I do see, and maybe this is something we can talk about, and it goes into the direction of tax, is that I think Jeroen put it very nicely before. I think the time of voluntary agreements and let's keep to the regional level, let's see what they come up with, and so on and so forth. I think those times are over. And as I said before, I'm a bit frustrated being a political scientist with this, glorification, let's put it this way, of we need more governance structures. Yes, we need more governance, which means, no simple, this is the way how we do it, and we steer until, we can't hold the wheel anymore, we as policymakers. But the thing is, what I realized, or what I see, what I observe, let's put it this way, is there are so many expert circles, particularly in Germany. You can call it Akatech, you can call it Geopodina, you can whatever. But at the end of the day, the impact those experts have is kind of limited if there is a different political agenda. Katy said car lobbying before in Germany. So what I want to say with this is we need a good mix of really, hard regulation, even though it sounds hard, which could be this kind of tax be raised. However, also the acknowledgement of what do the people want, what do the experts say, that really sort of paths its way into policy making. I always get the impression there's a lot of evaluation going on, a lot of commissions, but the impact of this, like the paradigm shift, so far, I can see signs, but early and weak signs. And as we said before, I don't think we have the time for this. So I think we should really need to talk sound and sense-making policy mix, as the audience raised before, solution-oriented manner. There is no agreement. What is the solution? Yeah, that's right. But I think this, to bring us closer to a solution is a sound and sense-making package of things. And this, at least from the consultancy, I could say that I observed, being it in the UK, talking to Swedish colleagues, the Netherlands, it's not happening. There's a lot of talking, but the strategic capacity, how do we digest what we just heard by the experts? This is missing from my point of view.
Okay, and what is the decision you would suggest to change this? Is there one lever you pull and then this goes in the right direction?
Well, I'm not sure if we are allowed to put Michael in the spotlight. But sometimes when I talk to representatives from ministries, I would, in the first place, would like to ask them, if we keep doing the study for you, if we keep writing those 200 pages, can you promise to me that you will read more than the summary? Can you promise me that you will read more and the important points that might also hurt from us evaluating your policy instrument? And then they sometimes say, yeah, we've got our agencies to do that. Let's see if we find the time. So what I would like to, ask is like, when do the experts get heard? If I may, put it out bluntly.
Okay, so more impact or more weight to expert decisions and inputs into political decision making. Also from the audience, transparency, also something that you raised, should be important in discussing these issues, raising awareness, communicating what the issues are, how you can solve it, and other issues. Jeroen,
I can
this on where you discussed, or where you analyzed the policy mix in addressing climate change strategies, where you also evaluate what is the impact of innovation policies, carbon tax, and whatsoever. What is the most feasible way forward based on this research?
Well, we know, for instance, that it's not a good idea to have a carbon market like we have in Europe, and then also targets for renewable energy, because the targets for renewable energy will just drop the prices in the carbon market, and then you just move away cheaper solutions that the carbon market selects, and you substitute them with more expensive options in electricity markets. And that's actually happening in not only in Europe, also in North America and in China. And that is known by experts, but is only slowly being recognized in the policy circle.
Sorry for interrupt. I didn't really understand the problem here. Is it, you mean they invest in renewable energy and just undercut carbon taxation or the emission trading system?
No, there are targets. There are targets for renewable energy.
Yeah.
Next to a carbon market with a ceiling for emissions reduction. Okay. These are two instruments that interfere, and the ceiling to the carbon market in the end will determine how many emissions will be reduced. And because if the targets in the renewable energy market also lead to emissions reduction, then that pushes away other options in the carbon market. And so what you need to do is think about right instruments. For instance, a carbon tax and renewable energy targets can work, because a carbon tax is not endogenous. It's not a price that responds to other prices. With adoption subsidies, it's the same. Adoption subsidies in the carbon market you should also use with care. With carbon tax, you can use them. And so there is a lot of knowledge now about synergy, positive and negative synergy between instruments, and that should be used, I think. But I would like to remind that I think we're not going to solve climate change without a serious carbon price, because there will be too much rebound. There will simply be too much rebound. And the only instrument that can control rebound is a carbon price in two ways. The two types of rebound that are most important are more intense use of efficient technologies. So you buy a car that's more fuel efficient, and it's cheaper in the use phase. And there is a lot of evidence for this statistically. That doesn't mean that it holds for every individual, but statistically it's so that people start using the car more frequently and longer distance. And as a result, energy use and emissions may even go up or not go down so much. So rebound has been estimated for German studies, for instance, up to 70%. Means 1/3 of your original savings are realized. The other effect of rebound, which is very important, is if people save energy voluntarily, and they save money also through that, they will respend that money. And there's also psychological phenomena playing a role there, because if people voluntarily do things, they may feel good. But if their environmental identity is not very strong, then they may feel licensed, morally licensed, these are terms from behavioral economics and psychology, to do worse in other areas of their life. And there's also a lot of evidence for that. Stephen Sorrell wrote an interesting paper on that in Energy Research and Social Science recently, a survey paper, showing that we should not expect too much from voluntary action, because it rebounds tremendously. And so I also don't want to change people's behavior. I saw a comment, and I understand that in the chat, more information in supermarkets. But I just want that the prices drive it. I want that people try to find cheap products. And then if they choose the cheap product, that is also automatically the good that is best for the environment. That should be the future. We shouldn't make it more complicated. We could, of course, put a lot of eco labels on all the products, but people cannot handle so much information. And it will not work for most people also. 90% of the people are not open to that. But everybody is sensitive to prices, everybody. And also, if people are really environmentally interested and altruistic, they're willing to pay also a higher price than for environmental goods. But if we do it through a carbon price, then in the end, the cleaner good will be cheaper. And that's what we want. I just want that clean is low carbon. That's I don't want to make it more complicated than that. And so these two goals are realized with the carbon price, and a carbon price will also show that rebound to other commodities. If people save money and want to spend it on other things, that's reduced, because if all the prices of all the goods contain carbon price effects, then anything that uses a lot of energy and emits a lot of emissions, CO2, will be expensive, and therefore will discourage people to go there. People may still do it. Maybe some people say, I like a fast car, I like a nice heavy car. Okay, but if you have a normal income, that's about it, and you cannot do much more. Other people say, I want to travel by plane once or twice a year. Okay, but you pay the price for it, and then that limits your other actions. So I'm not idealistic. I think we should realize that most people are not very interested in the environment or have other problems to deal with. Let just the prices and the budget determine the solutions to climate. And I'm not an idealist in this sense. And a final comment regarding realism, regarding feasibility. I think we should also just experiment. We always talk a lot in politics, political science, and in policy sciences about experiment with new ideas. Well, let's experiment 2 years with a high carbon price. Let's do it. Let's experiment just worldwide, or make a deal, not for a permanent high carbon price. Let's make a deal for a high carbon price for 1 year or for 2 years, or even shorter if people are afraid, for half a year, and let's see what happens. And let's do good measurements. And let's see then that it doesn't hurt so much and it solves the problem and it's effective. Because I think there's a lot of opinions on carbon pricing that are just malinformed, and that's sad. And the resistance against carbon pricing is not scientific, it's ideological still. And there's also at the same time a lot of support for it. That's good. But there's too much resistance and indifference. And also everybody's now getting more informed about climate change, but people should also get informed about climate policies. What are the climate policies? What are the alternatives, and what are their advantages and disadvantages? I think all serious citizens and intellectual citizens especially should invest more time in maybe we should give everybody a course in climate policy, you know? Because we're talking about a serious problem, and if people want to vote on these issues, they should also be informed. So maybe a few ideas.
Thanks, Katy. And then
yes,
Miriam.
sorry, just I don't want to take up too much time. I mean, I agree very much with Jeroen on the importance of prices and definitely on rebound effects. I've witnessed that very much myself, even in my own household and my own family, where I think where I do still feel two things I would say. First of all, on the pricing, I think we do need to appreciate that as people get richer, that changes their demand elasticity, and we know that the vast majority of emissions come from the global 1%. And they don't really care if they've got a couple of cars in their driveway or if they're taking their private jet. And I think that we need to be aware of the limitations in some of these things, and really also start to be talking about just outright banning things. I appreciate that carbon prices can raise money for the innovation, but we have heard this for so long and we are really running out of time. So I think it needs to be a package of measures, and we do need to start thinking. I don't want to wait for a carbon price till all of my vegetables are organic. I want my vegetables organic now. I don't want to have to wait for carbon prices so we can get rid of all the plastic or all the advertising that my children are exposed to. I don't want to have to wait for that, and I don't think we should have to wait. And that is why I also think that, as well as talking about the tools, we really also need to get back to talking about what is the goal of our economy and where are we going. And as this problem gets larger and larger, we seem to be almost incapable of doing that. I mean, I think we were better at doing that in the 60s and 70s than we are today. And just one final thing on talking about that, something that we've not mentioned, and I was here to talk about economics is one tool, and I know that this has also been adopted in the Netherlands, is to think about Kate Raworth's donut economy. The idea that we set as our goal to achieve, you know, a good life for all within the planetary boundaries and within the social boundaries. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, super. Miriam.
Yeah, just a very final word to back up what Jeroen and Katy said. I'm very much a fan of what you said, Jeroen. Obviously, we need to work with the tools that already work in terms of, yes, money is the issue here. And that's actually, hopefully, I made that clear, backing up my point about we need the consistent state that is willing to take on this hard tool, the hammer of, well, some would call it regulation, but it doesn't matter what we call it. But this is what we need. We need really a Bekenntnis, we would say in German, commitment by, well, leaders is a strange word. And this, well, is true for many things. If I look at the chat again, why is it still legal to confuse or disinform customers? This is also something we've been talking for decades. It doesn't have to do so much with climate change, but, you know, talking about how much sugar is in the cornflakes or whatever. Sometimes it's actually hard, but good to know the reality and all of this. However, I think we've said it, and let me say it again. I think we need to look at a sound and sense-making policy mix. And what Jeroen said in the very beginning, and Katy again as well, is growth necessary? I think, I mean, it is in a way, but it's a bit of an academic, it becomes a bit of a more academic debate, I think. And one last anecdotal food for thought, I literally dropped the washing yesterday when I heard the news. The US, Yellen proposed that there should be a global tax for firms. And I thought, like, okay, wow, this could be a real game changer. I never thought about this. If one of the, you know, most powerful economic states in the world says, let's think about a global tax for, I haven't thought it through and so, but it was just on the German news. And I was like, wow, this would be, what a commitment, what a game changer. But this is just yeah, something that shook me yesterday, where I thought, okay, if this might be possible here, maybe if the US, China, whoever would come forward with a really bold and ambitious solution number, that might really change the game. But I think we actually just tapped into so many things. We would need 1.5 days to come up with real solutions.
Yeah, thank you. We had 1.5 hours. I think we could go on, but I think I would leave it here, because you all summarized issues of the topic in a very nice way, so that I don't have to add to this. I think we still have to discuss the innovation issue at some point in time. And there is still the background paper, to which you find the link in the chat. But to finish this talk and this discussion, I would like to ask Mr. Wiesmüller to just give us a few impressions what you took of this discussion. Yeah, I hope anything.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mr. Leo. I just picked a stone and here we go. Thanks a lot. It was a very high quality discussion we had, I think, with tremendous scope of questions and topics. I take some files up. One is, I think we should keep in focus that this discussion we have, or elements of this discussion, should affect more the mainstream economies in the coming debates. As far as I could follow Austrian discussion, we need to have more of this beyond growth discussions, I would say, on a much higher level than right now. I mean, just remember, in Austria, if you have an interview with the leading economist here in the country or the ministry, he's talking about growth. When is growth coming back, recession, and then growth, and then we're going back to normal. So I still think mainstream economy is, well, it's not so deep into the discussion right now. Second topic I wanted just to pick up is, because Miriam talked about the mission concept, which I very much like, and I do think it's well understood. It's well recognized in Austria, at least in the leading companies. The main topic I see are two. The one is defining a mission. What is a mission? You were talking about the high level, the high-tech strategy, the 12 missions they have, and 2 are probably real missions. So it's very hard to define really a real mission. This is one issue I see, and could have a lot of comments there on. The second issue is policy coordination is the most complicated thing you can imagine. Developing a supercomputer is a child's birthday, comparable to really manage and coordinate policies. And we could use we could need a lot of help in this respect. Good historical examples for good policy coordination. Just take health. I mean, health and innovation, how complicated this is really to make a step forward here. The third issue I wanted to mention, just because I'm a little bit the tech guy here, or the innovation guy, is we didn't talk so much about tech. And we talked about green tech and clean tech, but in my view, clean tech is just a small part. It's not about solar panels, and it's not about wind energy, and so it's about tech for green. This is a different issue. We could, in the last 30 years, we have developed devices which have the computing powers to send a rocket to the moon. Everybody has it in its pocket. We can develop software which is able to predict the shopping behavior of young people with an incredible accuracy. Why shouldn't we use all this technology that we already have to solve environmental topics? Why shouldn't we use AI to better understand the energy behavior of cities or the biodiversity of woods whatsoever? And I think there is a lot, really a lot of potential there, because those technologies haven't been developed for this kind. AI hasn't been developed for environmental issues, but well, for commercial, for other issues, for scientific issues whatsoever. So I do think that tech for green has a large potential, and would be interested in our next session to see what we can do, which leads me to the penultimate topic, and then I hand over to Hannes Leo again. The pop-up hub will continue. I would very much love to see this kind of discussion being continued in the next 2 or 3 months with a different angle. It has been recorded, I've understood, and we can see it on YouTube in due time. Is this correct? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
It's being recorded. Yeah, it's going to be online. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So all I wanted to say is to be continued. We have all our networks where we can further discuss elements of our discussions today, and definitely the hub will come together in some weeks with another update on these topics. By this, I hand over to Hannes again, Hannes Leo.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I don't have to add to this. I think we had some common grounds. I think where we can all agree that we might need carbon tax, but we also need this consistent state and really taking tough decisions and being consistent, being also much more aware that we have to communicate issues properly, and that we have to experiment with this issue. Yeah, let's try something for 2 years, maybe in an extreme form, and see whether it's really such a bad thing or if we can easily cope with it and adapt to the challenge. Next time, I guess we focus more on innovation based on what we've learned here, and see how we can change things in that area to contribute to achieving these topics. So thanks everybody for discussing and joining the discussion. We'll keep you posted on the progress of the pop-up hub. Please go to the page, leave your email there, you will receive all information. And this discussion will be online on the YouTube channel of the pop-up hub soon. Thanks a lot to everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hannes, Katy, Miriam, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Hope to see you
Bye-bye.
again.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.